everybody, so today we're going to be going over how to make a set of flapping fairy wings. I know I already did the overview, but for those of you who need a little bit more help, I've got some of the stuff I use to make them, and we're going to go ahead and put a set together today for you. So the first thing I want to do is go over the different materials and options that you have when making the flapping fairy wings, and kind of design considerations, because you may want to do something slightly different, and then we'll go ahead and put a set together. So here we have some of the laser cut pieces that I made for these. I do also laser cut out the fairy wings themselves, and if you want, this is going to be a separate tutorial. I'm pretty sure I already did it, but if I didn't, don't worry, we'll do it soon. But basically it's the laser cut out of 0.63 over half an inch of aluminum. No, sorry, 0.063 aluminum, and then cellophane on the back, and then epoxy on the front. You can paint the back if you want to, paint the front, paint the back, then put your epoxy layers on, and then that'll get you what you want. I have these in individual cut pieces because they have to be bolted on anyway. You also want like top, middle, and bottom in separate pieces. So even when I do the fairy wings, the other fairy wings where they're all mostly together, they're static or stationary, they don't flap. I do top, middle, and bottom so that I can separate out these layers, and they can, you can position all of those layers even overlapping, so that it makes it very, very pretty. And some designs have all of these layers of fairy wings that are really beautiful, and so you can still do that. You just have to make sure that everything's separate. Bonus, you can use less material, and we're cutting out most of the material here, so even though we're the amount of aluminum in the actual wing is pretty low, you need to buy like a full sheet of metal that's this big just to cut out this piece, and so that cuts down on your aluminum usage as well. So yeah, when making these, I just suggest that you make sure that you separate all of your pieces out as much as you, as many layers as you want to be separate from one another, because trying to get into those little pieces to make them look separate, even though you're using one piece of cellophane or one piece of aluminum, gets really difficult to do. So keeping them separate is always a good idea, for lots of reasons. So, and so this is the Heartfire set that I made for somebody else, but we're going to be putting together Tinkerbell today, which is over there. But same idea, aluminum and cellophane. So next thing that's cut out, this is cut out of 0.1, not 0.01, Alexis. Sorry, 0.1 aluminum. And so this is where I have my my servos going into, so that like this is meant to be bent. These are the flat pieces that come out of the sheet metal, and then I have them bent at 90 degrees to get the shape that I need, and this comes off of the back brace, and these sit in there. If you're going to be using different servos, you're going to want to change the profile of these cuts. I got the heaviest duty ones so that I can play around with them and see how big I can get these fairy wings. So far they're doing pretty good with Tinkerbell, which is on the larger side of things, though just tall. So I'm gonna probably, up the ante and continue to try and kind of push the limits of this servo. But I may go down to a much smaller one because it's taking everything I throw at it like a champ. So these might actually be a little bigger than necessary, and we always want to keep our profile small. So up to you, design consideration. If you're doing very tiny wings, you probably don't need to use necessarily these bad boys. You could go down to something that has a lower torque strength to get the job done for a smaller set of wings. But yeah, and then that'll mean that you have to change the profile of your cuts, because the way I have this is it's a pretty tight fit. And they fit in like that. And I mean, like again, I'm trying to make these as small as possible, so you can see how on the, well, you can kind of see at the end here how it's got this lip, and that's for, I mean, bolting it down becomes a lot easier that way, but then on this side I have shaved it off so that you can put the two together and not have them separated out so much, rather than having like, it's almost 2 centimeters. No, yeah, almost 2 centimeters that you have in between the two versus none. And so like that, you know, makes everything smaller, which I prefer. So, anywho, but then we don't have anything to bolt down to. So to mitigate that, I have this little like horn at the end that we are going to use this little piece of like pipe fitting material to just kind of hold everything down on that side. And then I have a second piece here, and this is going to be something for the battery and the control board, the microcontroller to sit on, so that they're not just flying all over the place. So they've got, I've got some little bolt holes where everything can kind of screw in, or have like the battery itself is just gonna have like a little sleeve that it fits into, but that sleeve can be bolted in pretty easily. And then when you're doing your back brace, it depends on what you're wearing. If you're a fairy that's wearing a corset, oh, like me, you need a little help for your waistline anyway, it's better to do this, because then you can go strapless. You don't need to have straps at all. And you also don't need to have anything up top like peeking out. You can kind of reduce your profile, and what'll happen is this will all sit just above your corset line, and then everything down here is what's gonna keep everything stable. Now, I like this method a lot. For one, it reduces strain on anything. You barely can tell that it's there. They feel like they weigh a lot less because it's just kind of all held in by your, or held up by your core rather than your shoulders. You're not feeling a little more top heavy. It also kind of puts the wings in a better position, I feel like. But again, if you're a boy fairy and you don't want to wear a corset, well, straps are the way to go. So you could do it either way, but this is my preference. So when you consider that, you're going to have basically a box of stuff, a block of stuff that has to stay above the corset, but then you have to have all of this underneath the corset to create stabilization. The longer it is, you know, the more stable it's going to be. So, you know, my original design was just for straps, and I was like, oh, actually a corset, I'm dumb, I should have made it for a corset, and only like this much of it was in the corset, and it almost was enough, but not quite, especially with Tinkerbell. She's so top heavy. So the longer you make that, the more stable it is. Obviously, only go down to, you know, the middle of your low back, because then it can start, or just below that, because it can start to get uncomfortable if you go, obviously, way too long. If you're going to be doing straps, this is totally big enough to get everything done. This was done before I was smart and made a place for the battery and the board to go. So this would sit a little bit lower, about like that. But the idea being, what you're going to want to do, instead of having this up like this, like we do on the corseted back brace, we're actually going to flip it. We want to drop those actuators and where your wings are sitting as low as possible, because when you wear straps, this sits higher on your back, and you know those wings are going to be popping above your shoulder rather than looking like they're coming from your shoulder. And so I can actually throw this in here. Let's see. So on this one, you know, we have them, well, whatever. On this one, we have it flipped the other way because it's going in a corset. So, like, the corsets are usually pretty low, and the amount of raise that we get from having all our stuff on the back brings it about to shoulder height when we have it this direction, when we have them high. But these are going to sit higher, so we want to drop this a little bit lower, as low as we can, so that, because this right here is going to hit almost at the top of your shoulder. right? So if we have it flipped the other way, like this is going to be like just below the top of your shoulder at this point. And you can loosen the straps and have it sit a little bit lower, but like for the most part, this is going to sit a lot higher on you than the corset brace will. So you want to have this drop this other way. And important note, you're going to want to have this little horn flipped the other direction because it needs to go over and down. So, anywho, so those are the two different kinds of braces that you can use and the different design considerations. At least that's how I decided. I don't know. You can do whatever you want. The next thing we have is our servos. These are Fleet Tech FT, well, whatever. You can read it. 5 something focus. Focus. There you go. Ta-da! So I got 2 of those. And then a Pololu microcontroller, little mini Maestro. And I'll do another video on programming these bad boys. If you are a patron, the program should already be up on Patreon, so you can just copy paste, easy peasy. So yeah, and then the 6-volt battery, which is run away apparently, but it's a 6-volt battery. Next step. So I just want to go over the cover really quick. This is like my prototype cover, but you know, same rules apply. Basically, it's just it's a sock, you know, that covers the whole thing. I've got holes where the bolts are going to go so that, because unlike the feather wings, which kind of have those 2 plates that need to come through everything, none of that, that doesn't quite apply here. It looks cleaner if you you basically bolt these over top, because we have to cover the whole thing. Like all the electronics are going to be there anyway. We have to cover the whole thing anyway, so might as well go ahead and like have everything on the outside. That also makes it easier to access and deal with. If you want to, you can you know, put all the electronics and then just do like a full cover thing over, I guess. You just got to make sure that these are coming out of the framework. Up to you kind of how you want to do it. I like having a little bit easier access, so I don't want to have to pull this cover off. And I'm going to be hand stitching the bottom here so that this is all nice and tucked. I mean, it's all going to be under a corset anyway, but listen. Finishing details. So I have some Velcro at the top here and the bottom here. Mainly, I'm still figuring out the cover that I want to do, the best way to do it, but this makes it interchangeable. So I've got like this little strip here and this little strip down here that goes underneath everything. So just basically have a little cover that goes that way. We just got to cover the sides somehow, and I'm still figuring out how I want to do that. Anyway, on to assembly. So some of you wanted to see the attachment up close for the servo horns. So basically, I made these little cutouts. I made them so that they attach to, they're basically like a straight, like angle piece of aluminum. I have little cuts here to not only mark but leave room for the 90-degree angle, and then I have little holes here for the attachment to the fairy wings, which have exact corresponding holes. What I'm going to do to keep the front nice and flush, since I have to, like, it's easier, like there's all of this that I have to cover with something that like can come on and off to cover this so that we're not looking at ugly metal pieces. So I'm going to basically cover this in flowers also, but it's you can go either direction, but I don't like to have, like, this is what you're seeing right now is what's going to be facing back, and I like to put all of my bolts facing back with the nut side being on the back, so that any extra protruding bolt does not, if it was facing the other way, it might stick forward a little bit and like scratch you as things move if you move in the wrong way. So I have everything goes this way, and then I like to have everything as flush as possible on the front. And if you want, like, oh no, don't stick to the table, don't melt to the table. So this one is like what the front looks like. It's nice and fairly pretty. You can also cover this with a flower, which I'll probably end up doing because thank you TSA for messing up my wings, but whatever, it's fine. It's not like I use these regularly, whatever. But yeah, like you can technically, if you make sure that everything's nice and clean, you can just like put the bolts on, and that you'll have like 3 little bolt heads that, like in this case, I would color white, or if you have any kind of coloration here, you can color them the same color and kind of mask them so that it just looks like the regular veins. But that's up to you. I think I'm gonna cover it with a feather, or sorry, not a feather, with a flower. Just because I now have to cover up this. Anyway. Alright, so let's get to it. Thank you for joining me for this tutorial on flapping fairy wings. A huge thank you and shout out to my VIP patrons Chelsea, Sincere White, Sally Byers, and Jeffrey Park. Also a huge thank you to all of my patrons, without whom I could not possibly do this. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time. Bye.